How about bringing those folks in with the captain in a mediation process and let them have their say? All confidential. Everything that happens in that mediated process stays there because you brought in this third-party neutral who doesn't work for the chief of police.
I agree.
And let them settle it. My so-and-so was just like this, and when you said that, it made me feel a certain way. And you're like, I'm sorry you felt that way. You know what? I appreciate you saying you're sorry. I'm good. That's what we're looking for in mediation. We're looking for the parties to come up with the solution. In terms, if you're talking about investigative techniques, can we push harder? Yeah, I don't think there's any issue with that. You should. The investigators that are in internal affairs should be at the same level as your best homicide or robbery investigator.
Welcome back to the IAGA, a police podcast here with your host, Marlon Marrache. Milo is Code 6 also with us. Hey, a couple of announcements before we start the conversation with a very special guest. I think I've said it from day one. All guests are special. We've already established that. A couple of things. Let's see. Notre Dame got snubbed from the college football playoffs. Come on, Alabama with a 10-3 record. I don't know, man. That thing is kind of rigged a little bit. Let's see. Well, I'm here on Mondays, obviously, but Manchester United, right? My Red Devils are playing right now against the Wolves. If they win, we will be tied for, I think, 4th place with Chelsea. So to all my soccer fans out there. And the most important message of them all, it is December 8th. And I want to say it's kind of like 75-ish, maybe close to 80. It was a little windy. Here in California, Pasadena, over where I live, it's probably a little warmer. So for all my colleagues who retired and went to, let me see, Tennessee, right? You know who you are. Idaho, Texas, right? And last but not least, Missouri. And my wonderful guest is from Henderson. My mom and my sister live out in Henderson. And before we get started and talk about all this internal affairs and all this police stuff, we want to know if this Department of Rec and Parks director spot really helped you at all when you got into the academy. What do you think?
Oh, 100%, 100%. You know, working with kids has always been a sort of a specialty for me, and dealing with some of our PT instructors, I learned real quick how to shape up and just keep my mouth closed.
I was curious to know, you're probably into de-escalation back then, that what we call today, right? Was there like any situation when you were, doing these programs? I know at one point you told me you started the program for the children's, fill me in on that. And was it, any parents like go off on you, or do you have any situations where you had to kind of de-escalate, or what?
Well, not really. I worked for City of LA Rec and Parks, and just after I graduated from college, they offered me a full-time spot to start the first child care center for the City of LA. So this was back in 1985, 84.
Okay.
Couldn't believe they didn't have a child care center at all the rec facilities, but so they offered me this job, and it was at Jim Gilliam Recreation Center, which is in the middle of Baldwin Hills. Primarily African-American community, which didn't bother me a bit. But I'll tell you what, I didn't have a background in childcare. I had a background teaching kids. I had a background coaching and refereeing, but I didn't really know much about how to start a childcare center. So I wish ChatGPT was around back then, because it sure would have saved me loads of time. But it was a lot of fun, and was very successful, and we got a lot of grants, and community loved it.
Well, you know what? Well, first and foremost, thank you for coming. You were my boss. We're going to talk about that a little bit later on. You and I share, this media relations, this PIO, right? For all the law enforcement audience out there, where we can talk a little bit about how challenging that was. But I got to ask you right off the bat, look, you've been retired for a couple of years now. So have I. And when we got together and connected, just out of curiosity, you saw this internal affairs Police podcast. What were your thoughts, if any, and what did you think, man?
Well, first of all, I wasn't surprised, having known you, Marlon, that you would take on something like this, because I agree with you 100%. I've watched a lot of your shows, and I think this is such an important topic that we just keep doing it wrong. You know, we keep getting it wrong in terms of how we treat our people. You know, we preach this employee wellness in all of our doctrines, and then when somebody is accused of doing something wrong, whether they're guilty or not, we don't treat them right in the process. And I know you talk about, you know, the process is the penalty versus the penalty being the penalty.
Correct.
And I would love to, hopefully we'll hit on that as we talk today. But, you know, I think what you're doing today is hopefully reaching a lot of the upper level command so that they see that there really needs to be, this is not just a couple of disgruntled employees who got wronged. This is a process that needs to be really revamped from end to end.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. So here you are in '86. You're in the academy, and did anybody tell you about internal affairs? Was there any curiosity, I suppose, or anybody explain to you the function of internal affairs back then?
Well, I think we all sort of had an idea. You know, my whole class, we all came up with the Adam 12, you know, era, watching, you know, TV situational comedies and dramas. And so we sort of had an idea of what internal affairs was about. And it wasn't really talked about a lot other than you didn't want the guys in the suits showing up to talk to you.
Right. And so part of that would be, I guess my follow-up question would be, you think you would have benefited, maybe your whole class, if someone did explain to you the process? What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And I think it's important, you know, that officers who are accused of whatever misconduct, that they understand what their rights and not only what the process is, but what their rights are during the process. And I know that, you know, there's an officer representation section. I know you worked for them for quite a while, and there's the league reps. But, you know, a young officer, that's a scary thing when you first get accused of something and internal affairs handles it. A little different than if a patrol sergeant calls you in to interview you. The guys in the suits show up and they put down the tape recorder and, you know, lie-barger you and read you your rights. It's a whole different ballgame. Yeah.
If we can take a trip down memory lane, do you recall your first time you were accused, you know, since we're at the topic of internal affairs?
I do. It was I was working Van Nuys. I was on probation, and we were patrolling. We were working midwatch, and I heard on Simplex, you know, one of our motor officers requesting help. My partner, my training officer, didn't hear it, and I said, "Hey, I think we got a motor who needs help." He's like, "I didn't hear the call." So anyway, we get there, and here's this motor officer involved in a tussle with some guy in the middle of the roadway. There's another younger guy who's handcuffed to a guy wire from a telephone pole. And what it was the officer had stopped this elderly man for jaywalking and was just giving him a warning, but the guy mouthed off to him. So he wrote him a ticket, you know. And the son came over because all of a sudden he saw his father getting handcuffed. And what it was the son was trying to intervene, and he wouldn't listen to the motor officer.
Okay. Ended
Ended up in a Donnybrook, so big use of force. Tons of motor officers, as you can imagine, show up for this help call. And later on, the officer, the young guy who was arrested, accused me of using vulgar language, really anti-Semitic language, Jewish terms that I would never use because, number one, I'm Jewish. So when I got interviewed by the supervisor doing the intake, we got to that point, and he goes, "Well, did you say such and such, you know, derogatory term?" I said, "Sergeant, first of all, I would never use that term. One, because I'm Jewish, and I think that's a very offensive term anyway." He goes, "Oh, that's great," and he started writing it down. So really, my first experience wasn't as bad because I felt like I hadn't done anything wrong, and I felt that the scenario, the way I was being interviewed, I didn't really feel that they were out to get me at that point.
Right. You know, you bring up a really good, interesting point about, quote unquote, I felt like I didn't do anything wrong. Having reflect now that we're having this conversation, right? We're away from our beloved LAPD, and not just LAPD, just in law enforcement in general. Is there anything that we, because we're all in this together, we can do to kind of make someone feel that I didn't do anything wrong? What does that look like?
So I guess it depends on what the allegations are. Certainly, if somebody's accused of something criminal, it's a little different path, I think.
Okay.
Understandably, just like it would be in a criminal prosecution.
Correct.
But if we're talking about employee-on-employee discipline issues or complaints, there's definitely a different pathway, and I hope we will get to that, because that's something is very near and dear to me today. Is alternate dispute resolution pathways, and I don't think first responder organizations, particularly ours, takes advantage of those in terms of identifying what the issue was, finding out what the underlying issues were that caused the conflict, and then resolving it with the parties, having the people that were involved in the conflict actually resolve that. I know we do that with community members who make complaints. We now have mediation. We need to do more of that in-house, so that maybe is the first step, rather than putting employees in their corners and waiting till the investigation proceeds. Bring them together with a third-party neutral and work through what happened and try to let them come up with a resolution to that dispute or that conflict.
Let's open up that door, because let's get right to it, because I got to ask you this. How does an employee weaponize internal affairs? Or I guess the better question would be, what does weaponization look like when you involve internal affairs?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid issue that we need to address, because let's say somebody is going for an advanced pay grade position or promotion. If you're being investigated for serious misconduct, that could put a pin in your promotion or your advanced pay grade. So certainly it can be weaponized in that respect, where somebody dimes somebody off with an anonymous call or a letter to Internal Affairs, and the first thing IA does is generates a CF number, and suddenly they could still call them CF numbers.
Yeah,
don't they?
control file numbers. Okay. Yeah, it's what we call IAs.
So it definitely can, and it has been, and I think many of your guests will echo that issue, that it is weaponized quite a bit.
Well, that's just it. Do you think, and we can both answer this, but I'll let you go first, but do you think that when you call Internal Affairs, or when you get a hold of workplace investigation sections, what we call it, right, and for whatever reason, and I know timelines are important, we'll get into that as well, but I call and say, hey, Lieutenant Nieman was doing this, and Sergeant Marrache treated me this way, and this is what they said. And do you feel as though, and this is from experience, that I think we're so quick to pull the trigger? What do you think?
Well, we are. I think the way that the protocols are in this day and age, and they've been this way forever, is that there's a mandate that we have to investigate. There's a mandate that if somebody alleges something that, if proven true, would be misconduct, we have to take the allegation.
Right.
What I'm suggesting is that we have all these categories of misconduct. When there's a category where it's an employee-on-employee issue, where we have disputes, we're all brothers and sisters in this organization. We're supposed to be. And this is a very stressful job. You're going to have conflict. Just like in your family, you're going to have conflict. We don't take our kids when they get into a fight and just punish them instantly. Some people do. Yeah. How does that work out? You just punish them, and then that's what they learn, and that's how they proceed with their kids. How about if you sat those kids down, and maybe not mom or dad, but somebody who's neutral comes in and works through the problem on those types of issues? So I don't think we do a good job of that. When we have employee-related complaints that are obviously from another employee, whether it's anonymous or not, there needs to be a pathway where you can resolve those without going the traditional internal affairs investigation. Think of all the money we'd save and time allowing those investigators to work on things that are far more significant and far more important to the community, to our department, to uncover what happened or what didn't happen. When you've got employee-on-employee issues, bring somebody in that can work through those and avoid going through that lengthy process. And better than that, helping resolve and rebuild the relationship between those employees. Because I'll tell you this, if you have an employee-on-employee relationship, that goes to an internal affairs investigation, those two employees are very likely never going to work well together ever again for the rest of their career.
Yep.
And if it's a supervisor subordinate relationship, and the subordinate wins that complaint, now that subordinate owns that supervisor because they're fearful of retaliation, they're fearful of being accused of unfair workplace or hostile work environment. So let's fix it at the core of the problem.
I'm going to add into that, Andy, and say that if I worked internal affairs workplace, right, and I had a BS button, and for every time someone called me and said, hey, Marlon said about 3 months ago that I felt was very, very, derogatory. I was offended by his comments, so I'm letting you guys know. And I'm sitting here while I'm listening to the person who's calling, I'm getting ready to push that BS button. And I say that, I know it sounds kind of funny or humorous, but I say that to only do the following is, okay, great, tell me everything. I'm listening. I'm writing everything down. But I feel as though that maybe, perhaps, we should do some pre-screening or even a phone call, right, to the commanding officer and say, hey, look, you know what? Tom here just went out of his way to give me a call, and he told me all this about Marlon. What's going on over there? What happened? Oh, well, you know what? There was this P3 promotional exam, and I gave it to Marlon. And, we just made the announcement like 2 days ago. So my point is that sometimes we as employees have the ability to call internal affairs and use that as a weapon to say that, you know what, I'm out to get you. And I just feel like it's not just, I wouldn't say it's a waste of time, but it's an opportunity to have some resolution. And I know that you and I both know we have what we used to call WELDs, right? Workplace and employment dispute section, or they call it the ombudsman. I don't know why the term ombudsman, I don't know where that came from, right. But we are here to resolve this issue. The challenge with that, in my experience, has been if we are to resolve this particular conflict, and for whatever reason we're an impasse, well, nothing gets resolved. Here we are 9 months later from that time that we had that confidential, conversation, and then it ends up with an IA, and then you're sitting there going, well, there might be a statute issue here. Hold on a second. Didn't you go see the ombudsman about 9 months ago? Yes, I did. And what did you tell him? Well, I can't tell you because it's confidential. Roger that. I don't want to know what the conversation was, but I want to know, did you report alleged misconduct on that day? Because the clock is ticking, and then we have all these POBAR 3304 issues. So I always found that employee and employee, there's got to be a better pre-screening, if you will, before we just go to paper. And to your point, you're right. I mean, you've been around. 1997, Special Order Number 1 from the Chief of Police, Park says zero tolerance. Right. Zero. We are going to take any alleged misconduct. You walk in the front lobby, it doesn't matter what you say, we're cutting paper. And I guess that kind of blended into employee and employee. What do you think?
Yeah. So great points. And this is the perfect example of what I'm talking about. So you have an employee who's disgruntled, whether anonymous or not. Let's say they're not anonymous. So you have at least two parties that you can deal with. Take that from the get-go. Within a month, not a year, but within a month or even less than that, you put those two employees together with a neutral third party, not the ombuds.
Correct.
Because the ombuds works for the chief executive, right? The chief of police.
I agree.
And even though it's supposed to be confidential, and God bless them, it's a tough job, they're truly not neutral because they've got to report to the boss. Yeah. And if the boss pulls them into the office, whether they maintain their confidentiality or not, the perception amongst the troops is they're going to tell the chief if the chief asks them, what did Andy say or what did Marlon say in this thing? My recommendation is that we bring in somebody who understands the culture, somebody who's retired, who's got some skills, was good with people, maybe has gone through some mediation training. You don't need any licensing to be a mediator in the state of California, which is crazy. But you do need some training. You do need to learn some of the techniques. But you bring in that third-party neutral, who maybe was a former officer with this department, and they sit down with those two parties early. Don't put them in the corner for months and let them fester and think, what's going on here? Am I going to get stuck and burned? Am I going to lose my promotion? Bring them together and let them share their grievances. Let the person who made the complaint air. They just want to be heard, right? They feel they got wronged. I can't tell you how many promotional exams and advanced pay grades where I felt really bad because I got 5 great candidates, but I've only got 1 spot. Yeah. This person has worked for me forever, but you know what? This person really deserved it based on what they gave me.
Yeah, merit.
And so it's tough. But how great would that be, instead of them alleging that, the captain, was biased in the selection process or alleged something at the interview happened? How about bringing those folks in with the captain in a mediation process and let them have their say? All confidential. Everything that happens in that mediated process stays there because you brought in this third-party neutral who doesn't work for the chief of police.
I agree.
And let them settle it. And they may not come to a resolution, but maybe they'll get some better understanding. And because it's voluntary, if either one of them doesn't want to proceed to mediation or to the resolution, let it go to IA. Let it go the regular route. Yeah. It's just a very early on process that can help resolve conflicts and restore those relationships.
To your point, perception is super, super important. I always thought that when we launched this bias policing mediation program in internal affairs, it was great. It's to this very day. We launched it in 2014, and it's up and running still. And I think what they also included was discourtesy, minor type of alleged misconduct. But I always felt with mediation, you and I right now, we're here in Pasadena. Let's just say we go out and get lunch, and for whatever reason, we get pulled over. And dude, next thing you know, this cop is just being an asshole. I mean, he's just dropping F-bombs. You guys are LAPD. Just total rudeness, disrespect, et cetera, et cetera. And so you and I go to Pasadena right now, and we walk in the front lobby, and we're saying, hey, you know what? Officer Johnson here was very rude, disrespectful, very unprofessional. We want to make a complaint. Okay, well, we have this resolution program. Mm-hmm. We got this mediation, this alternative complaint resolution program. We can let bygones be bygones and make it happen right now. We can put you guys in the room face to face, and maybe, hopefully, we can come to some resolution. I think that's great. Roger that. I think let's do it. Who's going to do the mediation? Well, I am. Really? Oh, you know what? Let me get the captain or the lieutenant. They're going to go ahead and do it. And then, of course, the first thing I'm going to think to myself is, hold on a second. Why would you do it? To your point. Right. I don't even know if you and Officer Johnson, number one, are buds, or maybe you don't like him. You're not buds, right? Yeah. I don't know what kind of relationship you have with Officer Johnson. 1, 2, how fair and impartial are you really going to be? Or are you going to do what we, in the culture that we have, is, you know what, Andy, Marlon, look, I'll talk to him. I'll make sure that, he understands that he was being rude. If that's okay with you, we can resolve it that way, where you guys are here and I'll just talk to him. I just need you to sign here saying that we're okay with this resolution. And of course, a lot of people don't want to waste their time. They think that's okay. Me personally, I'm pushing the BS button. That is not a true mediation. Mediation has to happen. And I hope a lot of these, the audiences listening, all you command staff out there, where you need a third neutral party that's got the skill set and the experience to do so, because you're never going to get true conflict resolution. What do you think?
Yeah, 100%. I can remember when I first got into mediation, I wanted to learn more about it, and went to Pepperdine and went through their master's program in dispute resolution, which is great. Mm-hmm. You may not need that level of training. Mm-hmm. Most of our cops and our supervisors and our command staff that are good with people would be terrific mediators. They just can't do it if they're still working at that department. You could do it for, Burbank PD or when they retire. It's a great job. But here's the thing with what you're talking about. The perception of the confidentiality is so important with mediation. When they sit down with somebody they know from the department, whether they like them or don't like them, and whether both parties know that mediator or not, the perception is there's going to be a bias here one way or another towards the department, towards one of the parties. When you bring in somebody that they don't know,
Correct.
that doesn't have, a say in the game, I don't care. The resolution is up to two of you. I'm here to help facilitate that conversation. Whether you get to resolution or not, I'm going to work towards that, but I'm not going to be the one solving the problem here. That's not my job. My job is to get the two of you to solve the conflict. And when you use somebody like a supervisor, field sergeant, ACR has been a big program in LAPD for years. Very effective to make the complaint go away.
Yes.
But it's not very effective in resolving the conflict. And the number one thing I heard from officers that I interviewed regarding the city attorney's dispute resolution program, where they have community mediators, the officers' very common theme was, I felt like I was being ganged up on because they do co-mediations. At least back then they did. So you have two community members who've been trained by the city attorney to be mediators. You bring in an officer who's not supposed to wear his uniform, right? Because they don't want that power dynamic, which I get. So you've got two community mediators, the community member who made the complaint, that agreed to mediation, and this officer who comes in maybe in his T-shirt and his uniform pants, and it's 3-on-1. And so the officer said, yeah, I went because I wanted the complaint to go away. I knew if I showed up, the complaint goes away. So I sat there and I listened, and I may have said I'm sorry, but didn't really get much out of it. Yeah. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about true resolution where the parties feel like they've achieved something or they've got some sort of satisfaction, whether they come to resolution or not. At least maybe they got a better understanding that
100%.
The reason that pissed me off, Marlon, is because my so-and-so was just like this, and when you said that, it made me feel a certain way. And you're like, I'm sorry you felt that way. You know what? I appreciate you saying you're sorry. I'm good. That's what we're looking for in mediation. We're looking for the parties to come up with the solution.
Yeah, my that city program that we launched, not all have been successful. I'd be the first one to tell you that there was this I wouldn't even say phenomenon, but there was this thought process like, oh, dude, you can make this go away, Yeah. Oh, once I sign the confidentiality, I can just say, hey, you know what, I got to go. But you signed it and you're good to go. So there is no true resolution. And yeah, I don't think co-mediating, it's probably not the best idea. Maybe, probably law enforcement, I think that's great because it makes the officer feel as though that, and what I've always pitched, right, when we launched this mediation program is like, hey man, you're not there to apologize. No one's going to ask you to be apologetic about it. What we're asking you to do is to explain, and maybe you guys come to some common ground. I don't know. Maybe if you tell someone, hey man, you know what? Look, the reason why I pulled you over and I was pissed off of it because 2 weeks ago, someone died in that intersection. And there's been 10 deaths, man.
Yeah.
Think about that. Dude, you're driving 65 near a school zone. I got kids, you got kids. And then the person's feeling like, oh shit, you know what? I didn't think of it that way. So that, or you can say, you know what? Maybe my approach, right? My delivery, my disposition, and my attitude, it could have been different. I didn't have my cup of coffee. I just had a newborn. I haven't slept for a while. So for that, my bad. I apologize, but for what I did, absolutely not. And then you come to some, hopefully to some resolution.
Yeah. Let me just a quick story on mediation. That would have been a perfect scenario for mediation. I remember years ago we had an officer who was a great officer, and one of his old partners had promoted up, and it was now a supervisor, and had gone away, transferred out to another division for a couple of years. So they lost contact. But these guys were great pals. Families did everything together. Kids grew up together. And so supervisor transferred back in now. And this officer suddenly his disposition changes. You know, he's lethargic at work. He's coming in late a lot. And the supervisor's like, what's up with you, dude? And calls him out at roll call. You know, so, you know, I'm tired of you, Andy, coming in late all the time, and your work is lackluster. You know, you're a lazy ass. You know, you're worthless. And pisses off, obviously, the copper. He storms out of the room, slams the door, and now we got a personnel complaint, right? He's created this hostile work environment in front of all his peers. So complaint goes on for, you know, months, and officer's off now in stress. And after it's all adjudicated, we come to find out that this officer, his son was suffering from some rare blood disease. And he's been working all these overtime jobs because the insurance won't cover the extra treatments. Well, his old buddy, who's now a sergeant, didn't know that, never inquired, they lost touch and didn't really take care of our employee like we did, and nobody else did. He wanted to keep it in-house. He wasn't sharing what was going on in his family. That was a perfect example of where, instead of punishing these two, putting them in the corner, put them together with somebody who can get them to talk in confidentiality, in a confidential setting. And can you imagine that sergeant, once he hears that this kid that he used to, you know, basically be a second dad, he would have felt like crap.
Yeah, I feel like crap.
Yeah, and he would have taken that guy into his arms and said, "Why didn't you tell me, brother?" And the officer's position was, you know, nobody took the time to even ask or inquire.
Yeah, but yet we preach, you know, we're the thin blue line, and you know, we're this big family that we take care of each other. And granted, communication goes a long way.
It does,
and we don't communicate that well.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get into that's great and all, but we have to talk some internal affairs, because I know that we can learn a lot from your position. So first and foremost, how long were you a commanding officer?
Let's say I made captain in 2015, so about 7-8 years.
Okay, so let's get that lens going right now, because what I really want to dig in a little bit is the adjudication process. Okay, I guess first question is, have you been a member of a Board of Rights?
Oh yes.
Okay,
A number.
so Board of Rights hearing, you always hear me say that, Board of Rights hearing, Board of Rights hearing. Essentially, it's a trial. It's like a mini civil trial. A lot of other agencies look at it as if it's like arbitration or even civil service commission. In other words, your job is on the line, okay? Unfortunately for all other agencies, you have been terminated, and now you're facing civil service commission hearing and or arbitration. So I want to kind of talk to you a little bit about what was the most challenging part about being a board member, if you can share a little bit of that.
I don't know if it was
Or was it challenging?
You know, for myself, I really try to. I think I was born to be a mediator because I enjoy being neutral, but I've recognized that I have biases. You know, and the hardest part about being a neutral mediator is really holding those biases down. Sitting on a board, we really are arbitrators, and it is an arbitration because you have 3 members. Back when I was doing it, we had 2 sworn members, 2 captains or command officers, and a civilian member. I really liked the process, but I thought it was a little unfair that, and I know you represented the department in those cases, but here you're a little different because you had some legal background, you had some legal education, but in the most part, a lot of those officers or sergeants that are putting those cases on they're not attorneys, and they're up against very experienced attorneys who are defending the officers. So from that standpoint, I always was very cognizant of the fact of the power dynamic to make sure that our department was not being put down by the officer's attorney and vice versa. But the process itself is brutal. It's, you know, people are coming in there, they're bringing in witnesses that may be related to the officer that they didn't know were coming in, and it can get very personal. What I found interesting was the times where sitting on the board, you can tell that somebody's not telling the truth. I mean, it's pretty obvious. And when you have a department member who's sitting up there testifying, and you know that what they're saying is not accurate. Maybe not untruthful, but they're skewing. They're walking that line very closely.
Got it.
It's really tough, and I remember several times interrupting testimony or interrupting, particularly the officers, the lieutenants or captains who would come in and testify on behalf of the character of the officer. We had a case where an officer was arrested for drunk driving. It was his third offense. I don't know how he got 3, because usually it was 2 and you're done. But he got his third one. And in this case, he was driving 89 miles an hour down Ventura Boulevard at like 10 o'clock at night. And so the captain that came in, actually it was a lieutenant, that came in and testified on his behalf that, I would have this officer, work for me any day. He's got great character, I get it. You love the guy. So I asked the question. I said, what if he had fired his gun down the middle of the street? Pulled out his .45 and just fired it randomly down the middle of Ventura Boulevard at that hour? Would you have the same feeling right now about hiring this individual, keeping him on? And he paused and he said, because that bullet can kill somebody just as easily as that 4,000-pound car can. And so it was, in that respect, I felt the board members I worked with quite often, we were willing to really fight for both sides when we saw that there was inequities there. But the process is skewed. And now with the civilian all boards option, where it's 3 civilian board members, I have quite a few friends from prior boards that are civilians that have talked to me over the past several years, and they said it's a joke.
Yeah.
They're just, it's not fair for either side now.
Yeah. Well, I believe the position and the posture of the union was, hey, you know what, we get civilians, they're going to be more flexible. I'm here to tell you, working both sides, that it was even difficult with the traditional command staff officers and a civilian to terminate an officer if it was right. Let me paint this for you, and you can follow along about this. So lately, I've been thinking about, because I've testified, I've been hired to testify these arbitration hearings for false statements. So we call it false statements, dishonesty, untruthfulness, misleading statements. Mm-hmm. And so I always told myself, when I reflect about doing this analysis and think to myself, well, if I was a detective, right? So you and I are detectives, and we got this robbery suspect that patrol arrested. We've been wanting this guy for like 3 211s, for example, 211s being robbery, California Penal Code. So now they're in the box, they're in the interrogation room. Okay. You and I have all this evidence, right? We got we got witnesses, we got surveillance cameras. We have a fully loaded of evidence where we're going to go all chips in. And we're going to walk in that room to, A, get a confession, right? That's what we're trying to do. That's part of our job. B, they're probably going to lie. Or the other last option would be, I don't want to talk to you anymore. I need my attorney. Okay. That's when we're walking in. And so here we are. We got the skill set. We're really good detectives. We've gone to ICI. Hell, we've even gone to the latest science-based interviewing, SBI. We're fully all in. We got the skill set. And I thought to myself, if we as detectives do that with a suspect, why do IA investigators don't do the same with false statements? I feel, just kind of reflect on that a little bit. In your experience, did we really put all chips in to ensure that we're accusing this person of a false statement? I understand preponderance, 51% is more likely than not. But I often wonder, do we really go all in? And sometimes it might be uncomfortable, right? You might be an investigator in IA and say, hey, man, you know what? I got to do another interview. And I have to ask you, hey, man, I think you're lying. Look, Marlon, Andy, when you guys were transporting the suspect, from the location to Van Nuys Jail, there's a set of facts here that I'm having a hard time with understanding what sequence of events happened. So can you explain it to me? And I wanted to know from your experience, one, if you had a false statement, and two, do we really go out of our way to do something like that? What do you think?
So false statements are really hard, I think, because you don't know, you're never going to know 100% whether somebody's giving a false statement or not, unless you have video, audio that actually contradicts what they're saying. And I learned early on with some of the investigations, I did as a young sergeant, as a lieutenant, and then as a captain in adjudicating them. You have to really just look at the facts. And in terms, if you're talking about investigative techniques, can we push harder? Yeah, I don't think there's any issue with that. You should. The investigators that are in internal affairs should be at the same level as your best homicide or robbery investigator. No question. I think what happens, though, is that there has sort of been this passing of the torch, if you will, of how we do internal affairs investigations. And I think you bring up a really good point that maybe we need to really blow that apart and treat it very differently. I know for years they've talked about taking internal affairs investigations completely out of the department's hand and having independent, neutral people who don't know the parties. Because I can tell you, if I had to come and interview you, Marlon, because I know you, because we have a connection, a relationship, my bias just from knowing you could hinder that investigation.
100%.
And I should recuse myself from that. But then part of me is probably going to say, well, I want to make sure it's done right so that you get a fair shake.
Correct.
And so that's a really tough scenario that you bring up but I can tell you from my short stint at IA, I only did the 6-month loan. We probably don't, but I've sat in on tons of interviews as a rep or as a witness, and I know the style. I've yet to feel like an IA investigation interview was like a homicide interview ever. Yeah. And maybe there's some good in that we don't want to be that forceful with some of our employees, but that's a tough one. I'd like to see some studies on that, see what the results would be.
Well, I can tell you from experience, I just testified in 2 arbitrations. I'm hoping I go 2 for 2 because I really felt like the department got it wrong. And to your point, with these agencies, they're very small. They're not a big organization like LAPD. Unfortunately, it's the good old saying, hey, this is how we've always done things. Right. If you're a lieutenant in a small department and you promote to captain, well, here comes the next lieutenant. Well, how many IAs have you done? Well, I only did like 3, in 2 years. Yeah. And then here comes that dishonesty. What I have learned to know is that if we're going to be alleging dishonesty or a false statement, one, LAPD is the only agency that actually has a definition, which is fantastic. I think it's so good to have, right? We have a definition of a false statement. We have the definition of misleading statement. So now you and I can do an analysis, right? I can talk to you. If you're my captain, I'm your sergeant, and I turn it in, I can say, hey, captain, you know what? Man, I think John's lying, dude. You know what? I want to get your opinion. Why don't you listen, right? Yeah. And let me know. And then you might say, you know what, Marlon? You got to do a subsequent interview. You have to re-interview him because these set of facts right here are not clear. So it's almost as if, like, I think you're kind of telling me a lie, but I want to make sure that you're not lying. Sure. That's what misleading is. It's like I'm having a misunderstanding of these facts. There's some misrepresentation, if you will. So let me ask you again and again and again and again, so I'm clear about these set of facts. If you just keep answering, well, I don't recall, you know what, that was like 2 years ago. I kind of remember, especially with text, even worse. Hey, this is you. Yes, it is. Do you remember what did you mean by these texts? Well, I kind of remember, but I can't really put it into fact because I don't recall what we were talking about because we talked for like an hour. But if you keep telling me that over and over again, you know what? You're going to leave me with no choice but to infer that you're misleading me, in a sense. Big difference between that and actually just lying. And the other thing that I have learned also is I'm going to go say probably 95% of all false statements arise from that compelled interview, right? So me as an investigator, I'm pretty much responsible for framing that allegation. In my experience, it's been rare that you'll get a false statement before that compelled interview. Things like DUIs, perfect example, right? You get a DUI and you tell the arresting officer, oh, I just had one beer. Right? On the arrest report, next you know you're blowing 15s and you had that beer like 3 hours ago.
Right.
You know, okay, you can't get out of that. That's a lie. I get that part.
Right. But a good attorney is going to take that and say, well, did you ask him how many he had?
Yeah.
Because, I had one, but then I had 3 more after that.
Right.
And, I know where you're going with this is that, so part of my experience also in dealing with false statements is that I think we sometimes pressure people into false statements because we haven't given them an opportunity in an environment where they don't think they're going to have their head chopped off to resolve whatever it was that now they feel they can't speak about, right? That they're trying to mislead because they know they're going to get hammered.
Yeah.
Again, I hate to keep going back to, this alternate dispute resolution process, but this is a great example. You just mentioned text, right? So something in text, nothing criminal there probably, but it's probably
I'm talking all admin.
Inappropriate language or inappropriate remark.
All administrative stuff.
The person that did it knows that they probably shouldn't have done it, but now we're putting them in a position where we're going to pound them for lying or misleading us about what they meant when they did this, rather than giving them an opportunity to go, you know what, I screwed up. I was in a bad place. I shouldn't have said what I said, and not having it be discipline unless the other party involved says, you know what, if I had said that to you, you'd want something done about this.
No.
So I think there's 2 sides of that coin. And I agree that we need to find the evidence but under certain circumstances, we're dealing with human beings here. They're going to screw up. They're going to say things that they shouldn't have said. And then we're going to force them into a corner by these great interrogation techniques where they're trying to protect their job, their family. They got a kid going to college, and they know if they admit that text meant such and such, which it did, they're going to lose their job. Whereas if you get the person that received that text in a room with this guy, with somebody who can get them to talk it out, maybe all that happens is they wanted an apology. They wanted an understanding of why that happened. Why'd you say this to me? You know what? I was in a bad place. Shouldn't have said it. I'm really sorry I did. But if we don't give them that opportunity, they're gone.
They're gone.
We fire them. Fire a great employee for all these years, makes 1 mistake or 2 mistakes, and he's going through a bad time in his life, marriage, kids, whatever. Maybe he's got cancer. We don't know about it.
Yeah.
So
good point, Andy, and I appreciate you sharing all that because what I'm getting from you is you're right. It shouldn't be so adversarial.
Yeah.
It should be, and again, people swear by SBI. I think SBI is real good. If you're a sergeant or you're thinking about going to internal affairs, maybe you ought to take SBI. As a matter of fact, I'm going to take an SBI course because it is important how you ask the question. To your point, maybe if there's this text of this, oh, he harassed me, whatever, right? Maybe I can get your room and say, you know what, can you kind of just walk me or maybe just make me understand when you were sending these texts, what were you feeling like or what was going on in your life, or what was happening that day? This is on a Tuesday. You got to work, how much sleep you had? Kind of walk me through that. And then here we go, right? And then maybe ask the other party kind of that approach. No any different than a false. Hey, you know what? I'm having just kind of like a little bit of a problem, getting some clarity, like when you transported to go to Van Nuys jail.
But so that's the way we've always done it. Is exactly you're bringing back memories of people walking me down the path where I said or did something that I shouldn't have said. And I screwed up. And I'll own up to it. But some people are not going to own up to it because they see the acts at the end of this conversation. Stuff like this shouldn't be at this level yet. Let them try and work it out.
I agree.
Between the folks, and
I agree.
And the better we get at interviewing people, the more likely you're going to force people into those scenarios. And we're seeing, how many cases have we seen overturned in the courts? Death row cases because of the interview techniques that I would have said, I did it. You got me, because just let me out of this room already.
American Nightmare, on Netflix.
100%. So,
you know what? And unfortunately, we create a culture where we tell officers, our young FTOs, IAs, they're the monsters.
Right.
They're the bad people. So you do feel reluctant to tell the truth, because if you do, I'm still going to get hammered. And depending on the circumstances, I want to make sure I'm clear on this. You know what? For the most part, you come clean and you fall on the sword, and all we ever ask for is what? For you to be honest, truthful, loyal, right?
Right.
And trustworthy. And if you do, I'd be the first. If it costs me a promotion, if it's going to cost me, a bitchin' assignment, I'll come up to you and say, hey, Captain, you know what? Yeah, we have to. I re-interviewed him for the faults. We don't have it.
Yeah.
Or, you know what? This is what actually happened. And if you choose to continue on framing the allegation, that's your decision. But you need to know that when I go and testify right at the hearing,
Right.
I'm going to say, you know what? I gave them a second bite of the apple, and they came clean. They told the truth. Isn't that what we always want from our employees? That's just me, but I don't think that a lot of people think that way. And I think that's where culture, kind of clashes with walk me through that path. But still, I'm here to tell you that, and I'm a big critic of our beloved LAPD, but it's not just LAPD, but there's a lot of investigators out there that are not doing subsequent interviews or follow-up interviews, or really sitting down and roundtabling with their bosses saying, you know what, we're probably going to have to, let's interview them again.
Yeah, and that needs to change at all levels.
At all levels.
Because
You can't just say, I think you're lying, and then
Right.
here it goes.
it is the culture. It's been that culture forever that you're always trying to catch somebody in a lie, particularly our employees. And you push people into a corner, it's tough. You push an animal into a corner, they're going to defend themselves. Mm-hmm. And we're humans. I'm not saying that we got some turds on our department, right? All departments have them. But some of those we've created.
Yeah.
Some of those folks were good people.
Yes.
That we turned them into what they became because of how we treated them. Mm-hmm. And that's all I'm saying is that internal affairs, the process, the way that the command officers adjudicate complaints. Mm-hmm. I think we shared before we got on tape here is that I had several officers at my last command accused of really serious stuff. I had an officer assigned home for 3 years accused of rape. But I called that guy every month just to check in, because what happens when he beats a case? What happens when the victims recant and say, I was just pissed at this guy. Yeah. And now he's your employee, but we threw him into the cornfield, so to speak, for all those years. It's tough.
Yeah. But when they come back, what do you do?
Exactly. Because you have to re-indoctrinate them. Everybody looks at them side-eyed because everybody knows, even though nobody's supposed to know what the allegations are. Right. Everybody knows. And when we arrest people in the workplace, I get the perp walk is a good deterrent. But you know what? When that guy beats that case, what do we put them through? Yeah. When you could have just had them surrender to themselves.
Yeah, and what kind of closure do we give the individual when they do come back? We say, hey, you know what? You're working 8:25 today. Go log on, be safe out there. You know what? Sorry, for the last 3 years, we left you in the dark in the island all by yourself. Yeah. Super important conversation. Look, I got to pivot a little bit.
All right.
Because I love asking these questions to all my old school colleagues.
Thanks for calling me old. I appreciate that. Yeah.
I'm kind of old school. We're both old school, but let me ask you this. Take me back to 1992. Okay. And here you are, either you were at work or home. You're going to let us know. Yep. And all of a sudden, the verdict comes out. The Rodney King trial, come 4 or 5 p.m., not guilty. Where were you and what happened?
So I was sitting in what is no longer there, the May Company parking lot in North Hollywood, getting ready to work an off-duty job. And the verdict came out, and I'm sitting in my Ford Escort, and I go, holy crap, this is not going to be good. And within 30 minutes, I got a call, or I don't even know if I had a cell phone back then. I might have had a pager. Yeah. I was assigned to DARE division at the time, and DARE because we weren't field officers, we were working in the schools, we were the department's command post cadre. And so I got a call to respond down to the academy. And from that night, for the next several weeks and actually over a month, I was assigned to the command post at 54th and Arlington at the RTD bus station the first week. And I'll tell you, that was one of the scariest times ever, because they loaded us onto some old RTD buses that all the windows were so opaque, you couldn't even see out of them. And we had motors that were escorting us down to the command post in front and in the rear of the RTD. And all I could see as we were driving is just flames on every side of the bus. Things were hitting the bus. And I just felt bad for those motor officers who were out there with no protection. But that was a crazy time, and really changed my perspective about our department's leadership. Because I was actually in one of the trailers, the rooms where the 3 assistant chiefs were before Daryl Gates arrived. Because Chief Gates was out of town. He was at a conference or something in Oxnard when this all kicked off. And those 3 assistant chiefs forbid any officers from leaving that command post. We had over 1,200 officers just sitting, basically locked in the command post at the RTD bus terminal, doing nothing. They wouldn't send them out to start, quelling these riotous acts. Wow. And it was really embarrassing. I was embarrassed for our department. I was embarrassed for our city. Really a kind of a horrible time. But we came out of that, and it was a huge learning experience, even though I really, at the point, I hadn't made sergeant yet, but I wanted to leave. I didn't want to be part of this, and I'm glad I stayed, because we got a lot of great leaders that came behind them, and we worked hard on fixing and repairing the relationship with our communities, which we still need to do.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you for sharing that. So this is the one question I like to ask, but I don't like to ask. I know it sounds contradicting, but worst incident in your career?
Worst incident? Well, that was pretty bad. Let me share one that's sort of humorous, because I know you like to end with that one. But I was the detective commanding officer in North Hollywood, and I had a great homicide team. We get this call actually, we didn't get a call. We had a guy who came into the front desk, just frantic, said, "I need to talk to your homicide guys. And they're like, "All right, have a seat." Well, they kind of put him off for a while, and he boogied. He left. Came back an hour later and said, "I really need to talk to your homicide guys." I know this sounds like a setup for a joke, but it's not. So they talked to him. He goes, "Look, I'm a drug dealer. I don't have any drugs on me, but this guy that I deal to is crazy, and he just killed his roommate, and he wanted me to go home and get a dolly so I could help him move the body and then go bury it out in the desert." I'm like, oh. So they rush out to the house. They surround the house and call the guy out, get him in cuffs. And so he tells us the body had been wrapped in like piano wire or something and shoved inside of a mattress that was laying up against the wall in the living room. Now, a couple of hours have gone by since we get to the house from the first time this witness came to the station. And so my detectives are there. They're talking to me on the phone. They go, "Boss, there's no body here. There's blood. Look, there's some remnants of blood and somebody's cleaned it up, but there's no body here." And the guys, the witnesses are in our office, and he says, "That body's there. There's no way he could have moved it without me." And I said, "Go back and take another look." I go, "Stand at the front door." He's telling me, "Stand at the front door, take 2 steps in and look to your right." And so the detective's like, "Boss, we already did." Oh, crap. And the body was there in a mattress. There was a couple of boxes, but it's one of these stories where the detectives absolutely missed the most obvious, crime scene ever. But that detective, if he's watching, I'm not naming your name, but it's a fun story, and we've shared it for a while. But that was a crazy caper.
Wow.
Yeah,
wow.
crazy time.
Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that, Andy. Okay, so before we wrap it up, talk to me. What are we doing now? What do we got going on? Business, enjoying retirement. What else? Yeah, I am. I moved to Henderson. I come back and forth to California quite a bit. I fell in love with pickleball. I think that's a common thing out there, but I thought I was going to play golf forever, but I'm playing pickleball and going to the dog park.
And professionally, I mediate every Friday. I do mediations. I volunteer for an organization that does dependency court mediation. So we mediate for families who've had their kids taken away from them. So I do that all for free. And then I've built this practice, for I focus on first responder organizations and their families, and try to offer services where I can. And I'm still teaching. I love teaching. Do a little mediations relations teaching and some mediation training. So life is good. I recommend it to everybody.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're about to wrap it up. Any advice you have for anyone that wants to come on to become a cop? What kind of advice do you have for them?
This is a great career. My daughter wanted to get into law enforcement and didn't get into it. My son's a firefighter, which is a whole nother story. He was afraid to tell me he wanted to be a firefighter, and I said, "Hey, great profession. You got in a good line."
Exactly, they love you.
Yeah, but I'll tell you what, this profession gave me so much, and I've had moments throughout my career where I've really felt appreciated. They're not always there, but those moments are special, and that you're doing something good for our community. Somebody's got to be out there being the warriors and protecting our community and helping the community. It's a great career. I recommend it to anybody, but you've got to love people. And you got to be willing to put up with the crap, because there's a lot of it these days.
Absolutely.
So,
speaking of special moments, do you remember if you had an employee when you worked for you at Media Relations in a major press conference that was chewing gum in front of everybody, if you recall?
I sort of recall. I think I've put that out. I've had so many faux pas myself, Marlon. I remember putting Chief Beck in the corner at a major press conference to the point where the gauntlet of cameras and reporters, he couldn't even get out. And I didn't think I was going to be a lieutenant at Media Relations very long after that. But we both made it. We both did well.
Yeah, here we are at that O.J. Simpson. Hey, we found the knife.
Yes.
It might be related.
That was a crazy... Yeah,
to the actual murder. And it's on a Friday. You get to work, and now we're in front of national TV. It's international, and I'm sitting here behind you, and I just didn't know that I was chewing gum. And of course, while I'm not remembering that I'm chewing gum, my phone's just going off. And I think I got like hundreds of messages saying, "Hey, do you need to stop chewing gum?"
That's awesome. Yeah, you can always count on your friends for texting you in the middle of an interview. That's for sure.
Exactly. Thank you so much for stopping by. You're definitely you're a great boss. You're a friend, and thank you for coming down and sharing stories that I believe are super important. I know that you can agree with me that internal affairs is just a function that is very taboo, and it's not talked about enough. And I hope that people get something out of it.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure, and I think what you're doing is great. The more we talk about it, the better we can make it. It definitely needs to morph into something better. And I mean, one of our sayings was quality through continuous improvement.
Exactly.
Let's do it. Let's model what we put your money where your mouth is.
And just to wrap it all up, you're right. For the sake of transparency, right? We hear that word all the time. If you want transparency, you know what? Here you have it. And I appreciate you sharing all that. We're going to wrap it up. Happy holidays, everybody. Please be safe out there. And don't forget to go Code 6. Thank you.